Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me once again a regular guest on this show, Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Welcome, Daniel.
Thanks, Jay. It's great to be with you again.
It's really good to have you. We haven't spoken in a couple of weeks now, but always so many things to look at the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity website. Always very, very interesting things, and things that are interesting, quite frankly, because they're different. They're different from what the sort of humdrum day in, day out, same old news that we get from the mainstream. And in fact, much of what we read at the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity is diametrically opposed to the propaganda that is given to us on the major networks. So one of the articles that I looked at that looked on the website today that looked really interesting, it's titled Victoria Nuland's Ukraine Gate Deception. Who is Victoria Nuland?
She is the nation's top diplomat for Europe and Eurasia. She is the Assistant Secretary of State. Which is an extremely powerful position in the U.S. government.
So she's big.
Sure, absolutely. What's even more interesting, though, is that she comes really from the premier neocon family in America. Her husband is Robert Kagan, who is a big-time neocon, Iraq war supporter, down the line, Libya attack supporter. His brother is Fred Kagan, who is at AEI, and another neocon, strong pro-war supporter. And Fred's wife is none other than Kimberly Kagan, who runs the Institute for the Study of War, otherwise known as the Institute for More War. So this whole family is a neocon family. Victoria herself used to be a foreign policy advisor to Dick Cheney, and now she's working for Obama and Kerry. So this goes to show how the neocons will go from so-called left to right and in between, anything, as long as they're in charge and they can keep making the same mistakes they keep making over and over again.
One wonders if they're a mistake from their perspective, though. And, I keep going back to President Eisenhower's warnings about the military-industrial complex. It seems to me that there must be a method to their madness. From our perspective, people that at least are watching what's going on, Americans who seem to care or think, and not just on automatic pilot, are questioning the wisdom of getting into Iraq. And yet these people keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. It seems to me that there must be something in it for them.
You wonder if there's something in the neocon DNA that it makes them blind to their own mistakes, If you
or are they getting rich, Daniel? Are they making money? Are they getting power? Are they having great success in their organizations, in the government?
That's a good point. And if you look at the contributors, for example, for the Institute for the Study of War, you'll find really a virtual who's who of the military-industrial complex. So they fund these think tanks, and these think tanks come up with these very serious policy papers and saying we need to intervene in country X, Y, and Z, which benefits the military-industrial complex. They'll give $1 million for research and get $1 billion war.
Yeah.
It's a good deal.
Well, getting back to this article, Victoria Nuland's Ukraine Gate Deception, the article is suggesting that this Miss Nuland was involved with a conspiracy to install a puppet government in the Ukraine after overthrowing the current democratically elected government. How did this news come to light?
Well, it was very interesting. There was a telephone call made between Ms. Secretary Nuland and the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeff Pyatt. Somehow the call was intercepted, and what the call consisted of, in a nutshell, is she and Pyatt, in very, very great detail, deciding which of the opposition figures, and this, as your listeners know, Ukraine has undergone some serious political unrest in the past few months. It started in November when the president of Ukraine decided to postpone signing an association agreement with the EU, which, by the way, would have had a component requiring Ukraine to cooperate with NATO troops. So that's very incendiary. He refused, or he put this on hold, and these protests broke out all over. They've put up, they've killed several police officers. They've trashed the Capitol, and they've put up these huge barricades in the middle of the city. So, they are in favor of they say they're in favor of this EU agreement. So you have the leaders of these three parties, the Fatherland Party, the Svoboda Party, which has a neo-Nazi flavor to it, and so anyway, you have these parties and these party leaders. The phone call was intercepted of Nuland and the ambassador discussing, okay, Yatsenuk goes to Prime Minister, Klitschko going to sit out for a while, the other guy is going to go in the back, and it really, if you listen to it, there's no way any person with a brain would not conclude that the U.S. is not only, it's not just wishing them well in their attempt to overthrow the government, but they're actually key players in the game. And what's interesting is that Nuland has been to Ukraine 4 times since in the past several months. Her first trip was taken a few weeks before this unrest started. So it does make you wonder what she was cooking up and just how intently she's involved. She's been photographed with these demonstrators on the streets in Kiev, handing out cookies and showing their support. So so the phone call was intercepted, and it's a huge scandal. But to sort of the CYA, if I may use such a vulgar phrase, the U.S. started screaming about how horrible it was that the Russians, it had to be the Russians, they're listening into our calls. Isn't that terrible?
Oh, yeah, isn't that? We would never do something like that in the United States, of course.
Sure. And the deception is that Nuland said, oh, that's some pretty impressive tradecraft, meaning there was some really heavy lifting for the Russian spy agencies to crack the code of her telephone call. Well, it turns out she was lying because she was speaking on a completely unsecure telephone line, which anyone with some basic equipment could have tapped into. So that was the deception part of it to make the Russians look bad, that they were, tapping into this. But it's also a serious security violation to discuss such, regardless of the content, but to discuss such sensitive national security issues as this over an open phone line.
Well, yeah. I mean, what do you make of this? How could it be? I mean, you would think that Miss Nuland would get herself into some trouble for that sort of thing, but apparently somebody's looking the other way, or what?
Nothing has happened to her so far, and you wonder, is it evil or stupid or both? I don't think she's a stupid woman, but you have to wonder why she would allow herself to discuss such things in an open phone line like that. It doesn't really make much sense. But the topic, we can't get away from the issue, which is what she was up to, and that they were really plotting to decide who gets to run Ukraine after this government's overthrown. So that's it really, it speaks volumes about U.S. interventionism.
Well, Daniel, would you say that the current government is pro-Russia?
Well, I think Ukraine is a very complicated situation, and I really should emphasize, especially at the Ron Paul Institute, we don't have a dog in the race. We don't care. Yeah. We're not for the protesters or for the government. But what we do want to do is point out the meddling of the U.S., which we oppose as non-interventionists, and we want to point out the complicity of the media, which repeats the lies of the government without even stopping for a second to question them or even provide any alternatives. So really, it isn't any of our business, we believe, whether they, develop a relationship with Russia or with the EU. They should, probably follow their own national interests, whatever that might be. But certainly, there should be room for the U.S. to do business, whatever they decide to do, if that's what they would like to do.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make for good relationships to be out on the street. Can you imagine what would happen here, Jay, if, say, for example, some people in Mexico were trying to take back part of Texas, and they were occupying part of Texas, and we found, Russian diplomats down there advising them, in the streets of El Paso. It would be a huge scandal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it just seems to me the hypocrisy of the whole thing. And Jay Carney, a White House spokesman, says, according to this article, and I quote, it says something about Russia that they would tap the telephone call. State Department spokesman Jan Psaki, or however you pronounce the name, was even harsher, calling it a new low in Russian tradecraft. I mean, this is just totally bullcrap.
Yeah. Yeah, it's okay when we tap everyone's phones around the world, but they dare not tap any of ours. if it was indeed the Russians, it may have been them, it may have been the Ukrainians, it may have been anyone. But they didn't want to miss the opportunity to try to give Russia a black eye on it.
I mean, we tap Miss Merkel's phone. We tap all kinds of people. I mean, and friends as well. So I don't quite get it. Where does the United Nations stand in this whole thing? I mean, it seems to me if there was a legitimate purpose for the United Nations, they would be ferreting out this kind of evil doing. I mean, if we fought a war, a Second World War, the First World War, I guess it was, to make the world safe for democracy, and all that bloodshed was to make the world safe for democracy, and then the United Nations grew out after World War I, World War II, then, the Second World War to presumably do the same thing, to get rid of evil. And where is the United Nations then to ferret out this kind of stuff? And why isn't the United Nations, is it not, I guess it's really not an impartial arbiter of these issues?
Well, what's interesting is the UN really is kind of another tool of U.S. foreign policy. One of the other things that came out in this phone call was the ambassador and the assistant secretary saying, let's get so-and-so from the UN to quote, glue this deal. So it really treats the UN as if they're sort of an adjunct to State Department foreign policy. And as a matter of fact, there is a revolving door between U.S. diplomats and UN personnel. And as you point out, we don't like the UN because it's an unelected body, kind of like the European Commission, which lectures everyone about democracy. But at least the UN in its charter does purport to hold up the idea of national sovereignty. Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely correct. The UN, regardless of the nature of the Ukrainian government or the protesters, should, on principle, stand for the sovereignty of a popularly elected government. And unfortunately, it's shown itself to be nothing but a puppet of the U.S.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It seems that's been my read of it too, and this sort of just sort of verifies that. An advisor to Putin recently said that the United States was spending something like $20 million a week on the Ukraine opposition to Russia, and that expenditure also included training and weapons. Does that make sense to you? Is that consistent with the rest of this? I guess it is.
Well, it's hard to know, and obviously, the Russians have a stake in it. It's their next-door neighbor, so they're obviously concerned about NATO troops on their border. I mean, literally on the gates of Moscow. So they have some reason to be concerned. I don't know, it may be true, it may be partially true, but Victoria Nuland, in a speech that she gave back in December, claimed that the U.S. since the mid-'90s had spent over $5 billion for democratization programs in Ukraine. So that's a lot of money. And you can bet it all didn't go to flags and flyers and posters and, I Heart Voting T-shirts or something. We know that the U.S. develops tools for very active protesters on the ground to do things like avoid the police and avoid crackdowns on internet and these sorts of things. So there may well be some truth to that. We don't know. Whatever the case, we know they're spending this money. We know it's going to some pretty questionable people that are involved in these protests, and we just, we shouldn't be there.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. At least to me, it isn't doing anything, I think, for the American people. It's costing us an awful lot of money at a time when the country's going broke. I see that President Obama is with the French leader today. What's going on there, Daniel?
There you have it, some more about this surveillance. The European leaders pretend that they're so up in arms over the fact that the NSA has been listening not only to their personal phone calls, but that their intelligence services are handing over, willy-nilly all of the phone records of French and Dutch and other citizens to the NSA. And they feign that they're so irritated over this. But when they meet together, they both agreed today that let's put these things behind us. Kissy-kissy, everything's okay. But, what's interesting out of this meeting they had, Hollande and particularly his predecessor, Sarkozy, have been very, very aggressive. They were all behind the attack on Libya, which has left the country destroyed, the French incursion into Mali, which is not as it's advertised. It's been a real disaster there. But what they both agree on is how furious they both are that a group of about 100 French executives flew to Tehran And this is after we're having some thawing in relationships and looking at a possible deal here. So these executives flew over there to sniff around for some business deals. The same has been true with the Swiss and with the UK over the past few weeks, which is a natural thing. They want to do business.
Sure.
But Obama told Hollande that he's going to come down, quote, come down like a ton of bricks on any firms that try to do business with Iran. So it doesn't only punish Iran, it punishes these businesses too. So it's just horrible.
Yeah, it's just it's statism. It's government intervention for probably who knows what reasons. Probably the people that are making sure these guys get elected are looking to call in their investments right now. I suppose in one way or another by God knows what's going on. It really is. It really is disconcerting, no doubt about it, Daniel, but thanks again for coming on. We are out of time. I want to thank you for bringing this issue to our attention and tell people to go to the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity to catch up with all of the news that actually is fit to print. It isn't in the New York Times, but it's there at the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, and it's really worth knowing what's going on, trying to understand what's going on behind the scenes, or at least being aware of what's going on behind the scenes and realizing the hypocrisy of our government. What they're saying, we're fighting wars to make the world safe for democracy, and then undermining those democratically elected governments everywhere. It doesn't make any sense to me, but anyway, that's the way the world is. Thank you, Daniel, again for being with us.
Thanks, Jay.